All right, we've come to our final conversation of PG Signal 2020, and it's a good one. And I want to welcome both the interviewer, Stephanie Mehta, the editor-in-chief of Fast Company, and Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, a service I've used since you launched, Jack. And I look forward to this conversation. It's a timely one. Take it away, Stephanie and Jack.
Thanks so much, John. And Jack, thanks so much for being with us here today. Yesterday was, to use your own words, a tough day for Twitter. Hackers launched a coordinated attack to gain access to Twitter accounts for several companies and some high-profile users. And they used those hacked accounts to try to drive traffic to a cryptocurrency scam. And what's notable is that you have said that the attackers gained access to internal Twitter systems and tools. The last official updates from Twitter came about 14 hours ago. Can you provide any more information about the investigation and the steps you're taking?
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, John. And I hope you all are safe and healthy. Thank you for the time. Yeah, it was a really tough and terrible day for us, and it's important to remember that security is not an endpoint. It's something that constantly evolves, and we always have to be steps ahead of adversarial parties. And we noticed some of this activity early on. We took very quick steps to shut it down and contain it, and had to do some things like blocking the tweeting of anyone with a blue badge because those were the vectors of attack for some time, just to maintain the security and make sure that people were not falling victim to the scam. But as we said, we do believe that this is through social engineering of our own employees, and that is something that, no matter how good the technology is, there is always a weak link there, and we can definitely build around it and are looking at the steps in order to take to do that. But I think the most important thing here with security and just in generally is transparency. So we're committing to making sure that all of our investigations, we share everything that we find, that we show the steps we're taking to mitigate issues in the future. And the team has been working around the clock to figure out exactly what happened, how it happened, and how we can prevent this issue and related issues in the future. But this is a challenge for our entire industry, especially as we consider these centralized platforms and what they mean and how they're used. And we take that responsibility very seriously. So it's really now a function of wrapping up our investigation and then sharing what we learned, working with our partners to make sure that they're informed, and working with our peers so that we can prevent similar attacks on other services as well.
Is law enforcement involved in the investigation, or are you going to pass on the investigation to any legal authorities?
Whenever anything like this happens around the world, we work with local law enforcement. So certainly, yes. And it's something that we have good channels around and good partnership around. But right now, it's just a matter of finding all the evidence and investigating and making sure that we can provide a clear case of exactly what happened and the TikTok of what went down.
You talked a little bit about transparency with your partners. You are talking to a room full of marketers who, rely on being confident in the service. What can you tell them to assure them that Twitter is a safe space for their brands?
I think the biggest focus for us has to be trust, and how do we earn trust? And obviously, days like yesterday and situations diminish and erode trust. And there are multiple ways of earning trust in my mind. One is through transparency. So we're going to be really transparent, own anything that we made mistakes around, and what we find. Reliability and dependability is another aspect to earn trust, making sure that when we share the steps that we're going to take, that we follow through with them, and that we continue to be transparent around how those steps are working. And then making sure that we have a constant conversation with all the parties that use our service, from our advertisers, our individuals, institutions like governments, to make sure that they understand what we saw and how we're addressing it, how we're fixing it ultimately. But I think the more open we can be, the more we can share, the more we get better, and hopefully the more trust that we earn. But I think it's with anything security related or privacy related, it's so important to share as much as we can, and to own up to any mistakes that we made that would cause this issue to arise in the first place.
A lot of commentators who have looked at this breach, and I think this next question gets to some of the bigger issues around Twitter that we wanted to talk about today. They looked at the disabling of verified users. You talked about the blue checked users who had to be taken offline for a while. And it became really apparent just how important Twitter is as a communications channel for really important institutions, whether it's government agencies, and for some consumers, it is their main way of getting information. And I guess it begs the question, and it's a funny one to ask the CEO and co-founder, but is Twitter too powerful?
Well, I think it's the people that make it, that give it any sort of power whatsoever. And our role is making sure that we're providing value to them, and they're seeing that value. And it was a hard decision to take away the ability to tweet from verified accounts, but we weigh that against people falling prey to this cryptocurrency scam, and wanted to make sure that we were minimizing and mitigating that damage, while we also did the investigation in terms of what was going on. So security is really a function of understanding the risk and making the right trade-offs, and then acting as quickly as possible and being agile as we learn more. But back to the question, one of the most interesting things about Twitter is how much of the value was created by the people using it. A lot of what has made Twitter unique and special and powerful was actually not created by the company, but the people using it every single day. And they continue to show us every day why it's important. So as long as we are relevant, as long as we continue to show why this is important, and why it's useful, and also make sure that people feel safe and can trust a systemic safety on the system, that power that they wield on the service continues to grow. But it's really just a function of whether they find value or not.
I want to talk a little bit about Twitter in the age of misinformation. The company has been a leader in navigating some aspects of mitigating misinformation, and this was probably most prominently displayed in May when you labeled a tweet from the President of the United States on the grounds that it violated your policy around glorifying violence. I think people would be very interested to understand the processes and the conversations that went on inside Twitter, that policy around making sure that the policy against glorifying violence had been in place for some time before, but there was clearly a concerted effort to label the president's tweets. How did that conversation go down inside Twitter?
Well, to start with misinformation, I mean, misinformation is a massive problem, and not something that anyone is going to fix, because misinformation is a category that includes lying, and we've been lying to each other since we learned how to communicate with each other. So when you make the problem a little bit smaller, we're focusing on misleading information that has an intention of changing an outcome. And we wanted to start with the most important aspects of misleading information first in this day and age, which is voter suppression, which is health risk, specifically around COVID, and manipulated media, because the tools to create fake images and fake videos are moving so much more faster than our ability to detect them. So this is something that is a challenge for the whole industry. So it's important that we scope the problem to the highest impact things and focus our efforts there. In regards to the tweets by the president, specifically, we did label misleading information around the capacity to get a ballot in particular states. So there's some tweets that suggested that ballots were being mailed out to every citizen of California, which was not factual, and would have people believe that I don't have to register to vote. A ballot will just show up at my door, when in fact you did need to register to vote to get a mail-in absentee ballot. So that was a clear case of where we could provide more context. In terms of our terms of service and violations, we hold every account to the same terms of service. However, we do note that there are certain accounts like global leaders, and this is leaders around the world, that are saying things in the public interest, that are being reported widely, that have conversations that are broad. And we made a decision for these tweets, even if they violate our terms of service, to keep them up, but to limit their spread, limit the ability to reply to them, and also label with what term in our terms of service they violated. So we did this recently with the shooting and looting tweet. And this places an interstitial that you have to click through to actually see the content. But it also limits the ability to retweet and limits the ability to reply as well, so that there's not further spread of this. So people can still find and talk about the tweet that we labeled and we found to go against our terms of service. And you know, it's a for any tweet that we get reports around or that we see, there's a team working to figure out if it did in fact violate our terms of service and what to do about it. And in terms of a global public leader, we have this interstitial tool which we created about a year and a half ago, and we've used it around the world. This was the first time we used it on the U.S. president, but we have used it around the world for other global leaders as well.
Use the word "we" a lot in that conversation. Who's in that brain trust? Is it a combination of people from the legal world? Is it people who understand the values of Twitter? As you're having these conversations, who gets pulled in when you're trying to make some of these tough calls? Even when it came to building the interstitial tool, clearly there were human inputs that went into building that tool.
Yeah, we have a team that is comprised of folks with legal backgrounds, come from civil society, some come from policy and government, and this is a global team. We're not just focused on U.S., but we have to consider these actions all around the world. And for any tweet that is reported, especially when it comes from a very high-profile account, the team has a debate and discussion based on the context of what the tweet signifies, and then makes a call. And folks like me ask questions, but most of the time, a lot of those decisions are done purely in that team without going out of the bounds of that team. All of our policy, all of our product is shown to civil society, NGOs, policymakers, folks like the EFF. So we have a group of constituencies that we can show things to and get their opinion and feedback on, and then make decisions around. And that group is fairly broad in terms of its perspective by design, so that we are looking at every perspective to make the right decisions. But ultimately, the decisions come down to this small team, and we also realize that we make mistakes, and when we do, we admit them, own up to them, and make them right. So any action like this also has to come with a robust appeals process. We do have an appeals process that any account can go through, which can overturn our decision if we find that we're in error.
Recently, a number of large advertisers have boycotted Facebook over the way that site treats hate speech. And the boycott has spread to other platforms, including Twitter. How are you communicating or framing the differences between your site and everybody else, particularly for your marketers and shareholders? How are you underscoring how different Twitter is from the way other platforms have been dealing with the issues of hate speech?
Well, we want to take on a show don't tell mindset and show through our actions. And early on last year, we realized that there was a pretty significant vector of attack in political ads, and we made the decision last year to ban political ads from our system. We believe fundamentally that political reach should be earned, not paid for. And that is the principle we used to make that decision. And one of the things that was advancing that decision was the amount of misleading information that we were seeing in political ads. And this is a global policy. This is, again, not just in the US, not just for this particular election coming up, but worldwide. Misleading information continues to be, a great challenge. And when you can pay to spread it, that really changes the playing field dramatically, and we just didn't feel that was fair. So I think that stance is something that sets us apart. It's something that we're staying true to. It'll be a stance that we take beyond this election as well, just from that fundamental principle of political reach should be earned and not bought. And then in terms of broader health and how we're addressing hate on our service and harassment and abuse, this is our key priority as a service and as a company. And we have made some pretty important strides. Just 2 years ago, the only way that we would understand if a tweet or an account was being harassing or abusive is if someone reported it, which is just fundamentally not fair because it's putting all the burden on the victim. So now over 51% of the tweets that violate our terms of service are recognized by a machine learning algorithm and then can be brought very quickly to a human agent for review. So we've taken away some of the burden from reporting, and we want to get that number higher and higher, all the way up to 90 plus percent, so that people can experience Twitter in a way that they don't have to do work for it to be safe. The second thing that is a huge focus for us is giving people more controls, making sure that I have a lot more control over my space. Twitter is unique in that anyone can come in to any of my tweets and reply with whatever they want. We launched conversation controls recently so that I can only receive replies. I can receive replies from anyone, from only the people I follow or only the people I mention. So giving people more product controls directly means that we're not so reliant upon policy and enforcement, which ultimately is the long-term right answer. And it's one that we're working the hardest on right now. And, we started this with individuals and expanded it to advertisers. And then finally, it's just keeping an open conversation with our customers, and that's our individuals using the service every day, but also our advertisers. And I've spoken with the leads of Anna. I've spoken with a number of our advertisers about their concerns around the service and the broader industry, what they desire in terms of features or policy changes. And it's up to us to take all that feedback and integrate it into a decision that serves all and continues to make the platform healthier and stronger. But this is our number one focus. And like I said earlier on with security, it's not an area where we're going to reach perfection. It's something that has to constantly be evolved and iterated upon based on everything that we learn. And the more agile we are, the more we can experiment, the more feedback we're getting in terms of whether we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. That's what makes it that's what makes it stronger and healthier ultimately.
Do you feel like Twitter's policies reflect your personal values and your professional values in any way? Is what the user experiences and the policies that you've put in place a reflection of the way you look at the world?
We actually based our policies. We wanted a stable pillar that we could point to that spoke to a global population, not just the context of one population, one country, or one political perspective. So we pillared our policies to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and this document actually has a number of things that speak to certainly human rights, but also speech. So we want to base something that was universal, that was thorough and comprehensive, and then as the world evolves, continue to evolve that as well. And a lot of our policy evolutions are really just a function of us looking at how people are using the service and seeing issues or gaps in what we currently have. Our employees who bring different perspective to the company and their own experience on the service help tremendously. And the NGOs and civil society that we talk to help inform that policy as well. So it's less about anyone like one individual or group of individuals, and it's really trying to reach more of a global standard that we can all point to, and people can see transparently how these two things connect and why this policy exists in the first place. I will say we haven't done a great job at communicating both our policy, our enforcement decisions, and also how we crafted them. And that is a lot of our work. And this is, again, one of those industry issues where, for every service that you sign up for, you go through an agreement to terms of service that absolutely no one reads because it's just so obtuse and so long and so not customer friendly at all. And if there's one area of focus for us as an industry going forward, it should be that terms of service, because I don't believe it's necessarily positioned to protect the people using the service. The lens has always been around protecting the company and the service, and we really need to look at what that means and if that's serving the right function, and simplify it dramatically so that I could read it, I could understand it, and I could agree to it based on everything that I saw. So that's definitely been a focus of mine in terms of just looking at all the things that people go through to sign up and use our service and what they're agreeing to, what they read, what they don't, and why they might be confused when we do take action. And that's on us because they likely did not read through all those terms, or likely not aware of the rules of the service in the first place.
Well, that would be a huge issue for consumers. Do you have a time frame on when you anticipate being able to issue a new and improved terms of service?
We're probably not going to do it as one go, but just a constant iteration. Simplify it, simplify the language. Look for terms that are unnecessary. Look for areas that are not customer focused and instead are company focused. But there's a lot of issues in those investigations as well. So we have to do the work and constantly iterate it. I think if we try to do too much at once and just unveil it, it's ripe for failure. If we instead take a path of making small changes and doing them as quickly as possible, and then at some point, pointing to the progression and all the changes that we made in order to get to this place, I think it achieves much more because we get to learn along the way instead of just doing it in behind the scenes and then unveiling this grand thing.
In our few minutes remaining, Jack, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Twitter's interactions with the civil rights movement. I know you said that your policies are reflective of sort of global principles and global points of view. But Twitter has been, as a company, proactive in meeting with civil rights leaders. You personally have been very proactive. 6 years ago, you went to Ferguson, Missouri, and you met with Black Lives Matter's leadership long before the movement had collected the kind of credibility and resonance it has today. Talk a little bit about, while perhaps your personal values are not reflected in the policies, clearly you have a strong point of view around civil rights. The company recognized Juneteenth as a holiday long before anybody else did. How does your worldview affect Twitter as a company?
Well, I have a fundamental belief that one of the powers of Twitter is that it can shine a light on things that do not have enough attention, have not been acknowledged, have not been addressed. We saw protests and activists all around the world from the first year of Twitter's existence, and they were fairly remote early on. They were in Iran, they were in the Middle East, in Egypt, the Arab Spring, and then suddenly, 6 years ago, they came to my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri, and Ferguson, and I went back not to meet the leaders of the movement, but to protest with them. And my parents and myself were on the streets of West Florissant every day for 2 weeks, and it was an incredible experience to see my city rise up against injustices that have been plaguing it for centuries, and to see how the tool that we created was being used, all of its power, but all of its failures and gaps as well. So a big part of what we do has always been giving voice or providing a platform for voices that otherwise just haven't been amplified. And a lot of the power of the service that you spoke to earlier is because anyone can come on to the service and build a following by expressing an idea that resonates with people, by being in the right place at the right time, by sharing something that needs to be addressed and it resonates deeply with people, such that more and more people join in the conversation. So I saw that firsthand in Ferguson. It's where I met DeRay McKesson, who is extremely vocal in terms of Black Lives Matters, and all the work he's doing around police violence in this country, being data driven and data led. He was a school teacher in Minnesota. He came to Ferguson just like I did, and was using the service just to share what was happening on the ground and what needed to be changed. So he had 0 followers before that moment, and through that event has grown so much of a voice. So that's less of a policy question and more of are we building a service that enables people to speak in the way they want to, and is sharing a conversation that more and more people can participate in, and that is something we've always treasured and always valued and always want to build for.
Have indeed built a very powerful platform, and we'll be watching to see the outcome of this particular investigation. We're glad to hear you talk about transparency, and we look forward to hearing more. Jack Dorsey, thank you so much for your time today.